Greetings, everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our January Chartres community call. And we're very excited to share news with you and have a wonderful conversation with Michael Rice today. But as a beginning, I'd like to ask Bonafshe if she would open our call with a prayer, with an invocation.
Well, hello to everyone. Let's come together and with our eyes closed, as we feel our bodies, as we are sitting where we are, remembering the amazing Chartres Cathedral and beginning in reverence to the Great Mother. May she guide us in our session today as we explore the possibilities that we'll journey into in July when we return to Chartres. And may she guide our hearts and minds and bodies and souls to envision a beautiful time that will be transformative for each and every one of us and transformative for the world through each and every one of us, coming together and putting forth our best selves. May we be truly used in our best potential, in our highest potential, for creating a world that everyone has a place and everyone can reach their full potential in alignment with spirit, in harmony with the earth. Amen.
Thank you, Bonafshe. And welcome to Apila and to Carolyn. Happy to see you. And I'd like to also welcome all of our participants today and give you an overview of our call. We have a bit of an announcement to make. We had scheduled Robert Lawler to be one of our featured presenters in Chartres this July, and he informed us about 10 days ago or so that he wasn't feeling capable of making the trip, that he didn't feel his health would support that, and actually withdrew from his commitment to work with us. And so we felt that it was wise to just honor that and support him in his health. And through the connections with Kaylin, we were able to invite Michael Rice, who is an extraordinary human being and sacred geometry architect and a wizard of sorts, to join our faculty. And we've had discussions with him, and he is fully on board to join us. And he's going to be our featured speaker today. So you're all going to get a chance to meet him, at least in cyberspace, and get a sense of his interest and wisdom in the realm of sacred geometry. So that's one of the things that's taken place. I think probably all of you have been experiencing dramatic change in your life. It seems to be occurring everywhere. And this is one further example of that. And we feel very blessed that it all took place very gracefully, and it was just a transition that worked in great harmony. So that's the overarching arc of our call today, is that Jim will give an update on how things are going with the Wisdom School of Graduate Studies and Ubiquity University and his life and whatever he feels like talking about today in the light of political events. And then Michael Rice will be our featured speaker, and there'll be time for questions and discussion after that. So, Jim, I'd like to welcome you to share with us what's living in your heart.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Banafshe, for your gracious invocation. I want to just start by acknowledging Robert Lawler, who has been one of the most extraordinary writers and thinkers of our generation. For those of you who've read Voices of the First Day and his recent works on geometry, at the end of time, the scope and immensity of his mind is quite extraordinary. But, we at the Wisdom School have been having our own transition. Will Tagle and Judith Yost, our Dean of the Wisdom School and Dean of Students, just sent out a letter this last week that I think most of you received, saying that they were transitioning. And it struck me, that I'm a 60s guy, and the people that were the giants, when I was coming of age, are now in their 80s and in some cases 90s. And they're beginning to just sort of retire from the scene. And Robert Lawler's just one of them. And it's just worth pausing in tribute, I would say, and in acknowledgement of some of these great moral and intellectual and spiritual leaders of our time who emerge within us and hold the torch for decades, as some of us have, and then get to that point in their lives where they just physically can't be as mobile as they would like to be. And then how a Michael Rice steps up in vigor and enthusiasm and in the vitality of youth to take the torch and carry on. And I just find that a very comforting thought, so that as we experience the vitality of Michael in a few minutes, and you can just, those of you who were there last year, can you imagine Jane 108 times 2? I mean, put on your safety belts. This is going to be, in fact, before the call, we thought, why don't we just turn the mornings over basically to Michael and Jane and let them interact around this stupendously profound awareness gifted to us by Pythagoras, that at the deepest strata of the universe out of which we come and back into which we go is number and mathematics and geometry. And this next liberal art is going to be diving into that reality. And I personally can hardly wait. I just found myself coming alive in ways I'd never experienced before around mathematics. And I see Carolyn's on the call, so I know Carolyn was as excited as the rest of us. I mean, just because most of us think of mathematics as completely boring, sterile, and without any particular importance, but to realize, as we did with Jane and this next year with Michael, the vitality of geometry in not only the construction of the universe, but in the very construction of human spirituality. We think we believe things because we believe things, but our spirituality is designed according to the algorithms of mathematics and geometry. That's what Pythagoras said. That's what Plato said. And we're going to have the opportunity to go very deeply on it. If Michael gets here, apparently he's in Slovakia and was pulled over by the police to check his passport. So he's coming around the corner, I think, any moment now.
He's turning on his computer now.
Oh, good. Well, let me say one final thing. And that is that in addition to geometry, I think it's just important for us as we get oriented for 2018 to also take nurturance from the opportunity we'll have in both Chartres this year and in mystical Paris to immerse ourselves in the divine feminine. You know, and as you think of Trump, Putin, and all those cronies, you know, marauding around the planet in a devastating violence of word and deed. You know, where does one go when one's in pain? One goes to the mother. Jung said that all spiritual searching emerges from the feminine. And so as we experience and traverse this disruptive world of harsh politics and fake news and cynical manipulation, I have been in my own soul, I could feel a yearning to be back in Chartres, a yearning to experience Andrew Harvey, who is the best of the best around mystical Paris and the deep feminine of Paris. You know, Paris is probably the only city in the world that was consciously built and evolved in relationship to the feminine. And Chartres, in the orbit and in the proximity of Paris, the queen of the cathedrals. So as we experience Geometrica and the abstractions of the universe, let us also, as we approach Chartres this year, open our hearts and minds to the feminine that has been feeding Chartres for over 3,000 years. And Paris, since it was founded about 1,500 years ago, because those subtle energies also feed our souls. So I think I'll turn it back over to you, Karen. And thank you all for joining this call. And Michael, thank you for joining. I can hardly wait to meet you in Chartres and to see what you and Jane will get up to as you explore the profound dimensionality of Geometrica.
Thank you, Jim. It was wonderful to hear your tribute to Robert Lawler. And just so that all of the students who are planning to come to Chartres this year, his main book on sacred geometry is still on our reading list, and we will have him with us in spirit through his writings and our discussion around what he brought forward. So that's another wonderful aspect of having both Robert with us through his writings and having Michael with us in person. And I think, Kaylin, Michael is at any moment coming on. Is that true?
He says he's logging out of the computer now.
Okay, he's logging in. Good. So
I wonder, Carolyn, you look like you're blacked out, Carolyn, but while we have a moment, do you want to say anything?
Minute.
While you're joining us?
Oh, I had my camera blocked.
there you are.
Hello.
That's my paranoia. I'm convinced the government. Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Well, I'm delighted to be able to make this call, and I loved hearing what you had to say. And of course, I loved just hearing the name Pythagoras gives me chills these days because I fell madly in love with him, and the journey I made last year because of what I felt was my completely being inappropriate to teach last year. So I poured myself into Pythagoras. But what happened as a result was I had one of the most profound inner journeys of my own life, which was completely unexpected, as those transitions and transformations are, which has made me appreciate this mystery school far more than words can communicate, because I have myself benefited as much as I think anyone could. And it was also one of the richest times with people, as I got to know Kaylin so well and spend time with with people I did not have a chance to relate to that much. But and I hope I can communicate this, because I think it's relevant to what's happening today. I'm writing a book on prayer, which for me is a very bold thing to do. And what happened when I got to Pythagoras was that a whole universe for me came together. The whole bio-spiritual ecology of our biology fell into place. And it was a journey. In going backwards to Pythagoras, what I realized was, from the time I had connected with Teresa of Avila, I had begun an education of unlearning everything that I had learned as a scholar. That the mystical journey was one in which I started to go what I would call backwards, to unlearn everything that traditional education had taught me was true, that I had begun a journey of unlearning. And when I got to Pythagoras, I'd reached the end. And as I poured myself into his story and his knowledge, what then came together for me, I started to have dreams, and the Old Testament became the Testament, not the Old, but the Testament. And Plato, Aristotle, what I realized was I was in an atmosphere before the word doubt had ever been created. The word had not been created. And so I was at a time when, in standing on the earth, humanity had not yet evolved the ego that could contain doubt. They hadn't evolved a self capable of doubting. So they existed in a state not even of humbleness, but of position of, how does this system operate? So the knowledge of mathematics, the knowledge of where Plato could say, all right, this is the archetypal system of the gods. Olympus is archetypal. This is Aristotle says, I'll take the rational world. Plato, I'll take the elegant world of beauty and virtue. They charted, the Romans, we'll structure government. And when the Old Testament kind of came together, I won't even go into Buddhism and all how that fits in, but everything comes down to the nature of God was understood as law. The functioning principles were all being charted as laws, and of basically the mathematics, and understanding that everything is law, and it converts to the mathematics of the soul, the laws of the soul, the laws of karma, the laws of the biology. It all, that the expression of God is ultimately a system of law, and that law converts to vocabulary. And that's what came together for me. And it was, for me, a mystical explosion that is also a biological one, because our biology is fully attuned to the laws of nature in exactly the same way. It is the exact same structure as the Chartres Cathedral. It is a duplicate. So the mathematics of the body are part of the sacred mathematics and the sacred geometry. The same calculations are in our biology. So what I think is happening now is that there is a collision of the gods, the collision of theologies, because these old mythologies of the Abrahamic religions of this, they can't contain what we need to go forward. They can't contain, as we stand on the brink of becoming entering the galactic age. Our mythologies can no longer contain us. We need the truth from way back when to forge a solar consciousness with the truth of the pure truth that came then, with how we need to see the galactic universe. And mathematics is the one continuum, mathematics and the laws of nature. And well, I could go on, and forgive me for rambling, but there.
Carolyn, feel free to go on for a few more minutes.
Well, yeah, were you going to say something, Jim?
I just wanted, just while you're regrouping there, I just sent you an email, Carolyn.
Oh,
and I just thought I want to recommend 2 books.
Yeah.
For everybody in advance of Chartres, and I think I may be reorienting my own remarks from Zoroaster to the works of Yuval Harari.
Okay.
One book called Sapiens, and another book called Homo Deus.
Sapiens?
And Homo Deus. He's an Israeli. He teaches at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. And they are the best books I have ever read about our species. And he's making the point, Carolyn, that you just made, that I was struggling to make in Chartres, that we're all struggling with. Why is the inherited spirituality no longer able to contain what we're becoming? Mm-hmm. And he wrestles with the same thing, but with an erudition and unbelievably comprehensive historical, philosophical, and spiritual comprehension that he lays out our species in an extremely dispassionate way and will challenge your thinking. Not only, I'm not saying Carolyn, but all of us challenge my thinking in ways that I've never been challenged before.
For me, as someone in health who has resonated with the holistic template, and it is obvious to me that the pulsating archetypal template is one that is moving all things toward oneness or wholeness. And to wit, you wouldn't even consider going to a doctor, and if the doctor said, I've got this pill for you, your liver is sick, but it's going to blow your heart right out of your body, you wouldn't even consider it now. You would say, because we don't treat our organs as sovereign nations.
Exactly.
Our body is now a whole planet, and that's a microcosm of the macrocosm of the whole. All right. That is a biotheology in that. And this is where the basic tenets of theology no longer are capable of supporting our health, because they teach a fundamental core theology that says, in order to be part of this religion, you believe in separation. that you are different than others, that in order to be part of this creed, you cannot be part of holism. This is why no one heals within a religion. It is impossible to have a full healing and adhere to certain tenets within religions that say, my religion's better than you, because that generates the antithesis of holism within your psyche. You see?
Yes.
The God of holism, the universal God, is a mathematician. It's a oneness. It's a wholeness. It's the Pythagorean oneness. That's the God of our natural biology. Once you get into a theology where God becomes a possession that says, this is our God, and I'm sorry, our theology says, you are different, you're an infidel, you're this, you're that, you're where there's the rapture, whatever, that we are the chosen, you're not. That immediately sets your biology into a course of shattering a fundamental DNA that says, wait a minute, this isn't right. It's the soul's DNA that begins to go askew.
Carolyn, I don't mean to interrupt, but Michael's now
Michael,
joined us.
hello. Welcome to the family.
And, yeah, Carolyn was just filling in for you, Michael.
Carolyn, thank you very much. And I
on this
apologize
call.
to the panel. And to the listeners.
Welcome to the family.
Thank you, Carolyn. And may I apologize to everyone listening there. I was driving through the city of Bratislava in good time to get here. But then I ran a U-turn by mistake, and these two nice policemen wanted to practice their English on me. So everything got delayed.
But we're happy to have you with us right now, Michael, and you're welcome to go ahead and begin your presentation.
Thank you, thank you. So, Karen, as you and I discussed, we can do this in an interview format, just so you can ask the questions and I can move with this. Is that okay with you still?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
So I'd like to start out by asking you if you have a sense of the origin point of your love for geometry and form, and how that came about, and what actually was activated in you.
Oh, great question. Okay, so I studied architecture in the University of College in Dublin, and I was a little naive. I started college quite young, and I fully imagined and expected that they would be teaching us the secret of creation, at least by Christmas time of the first semester. And but it wasn't to be, as you might imagine. I was expecting some sort of fundamental presentation or understanding or teaching about how nature moves, how we create, how things take shape and form. And it wasn't so. And I imagined maybe it would take a little bit longer, maybe next year, the year after. But I was very lucky that in the same time I began the study of a Japanese martial art, which introduced me to the concepts of yin and yang, the concepts of the polarity of opposites, of energy flow and movement. And what I was learning in one discipline, I began to integrate into the architecture. So I began to see that in the same way we moved our physical body from A to B with an intention and with a smoothness and with a desire to affect change in the environment, I could see the same parallels in space, the same parallels in our desire to affect the outcome or the experience within a space. And so there was the years of study architecture, and then upon graduation, I was very fortunate to be working with with a small practice that gave me the opportunity to begin almost immediately. And around this time, which would have been the late 80s, early 90s, if you recall, feng shui wasn't so popular in the West. but I actually saw a small advertisement in a local newspaper saying architect with feng shui knowledge required for a project. And so I had no idea, but it sounded interesting. So I did a little bit of research, but there was very little at the time. But that prompted a desire to know more about the dedicated understanding and the historic context of how people have understood space and energy. And I studied with Roger Green initially, and then with my good friend Dan Winter, and traveled a lot. And I was very fortunate that as I opened and learned and indeed forgot some of the stuff I learned in college, which I think was necessary, and I got the opportunity to do many, many, many buildings. And in this way, I was able to try the different shapes and get immediate feedback that was beyond a mere philosophy or an idea or an intellectual appreciation. It became an energetic, real-life human response to the decisions I was making or I was opening to. So increasingly, as the projects mounted and the experiences and the travel and the clients became more diverse, the context richness of the information and the experience led me to understand a lot more about how the shape of a space is fundamental to our experience of it. So in the last number of years, I have found it very interesting to look at what is called neuroaesthetics, which is a growing study of the effects of beauty, the effects of harmony, the effects of proportion on our cortex, on our thinking processes, on our immune system, on our whole physiology, psychophysiology. And the evidence is overwhelming. What all of us on the panel have known for decades, that space affects us, and beautiful space affects us beautifully. And I went through many phases with this work, from a somewhat rigid understanding, or not understanding, that's not the right word, a rigid application of the geometry as an imprint of the design. In the last few years, I've thankfully relaxed that considerably because it's a very masculine approach, which is absolutely fine, but it's yet again another imposition on the earth. It's another intellectual straight line assumption. And even though the buildings were curvy, most of them, nevertheless, they came into being because of an imprint of a pattern. And that, of course, is beautiful. But is that all that we need to do? There is more going on, and that's what I'd love to share with the people in Chartres in June. How's that for an overview?
That's a wonderful start.
Okay.
And it's exciting to hear how your work has evolved, from the original question you to have answered when you entered architecture school that actually never was.
Yes.
And so can you say a little bit more about how you now are interested in how the feminine principles are working in architecture or in you?
Aha. Okay. Again, these are really good questions you're throwing at me. Thank you. I'm well aware that the concepts of masculine, feminine are a little overused and in many cases misunderstood. Many people, regardless of how you set it up beforehand, many people continue to associate the feminine with woman and the masculine with man. And that is very limiting and can obscurate the essence of what we can learn from this understanding. So, having said that, in simplistic terms, I would view the masculine as the ability to direct intention and focus, and the feminine as the ability to be sensitive and feel energy, be it in a space, be it in a situation, be it in a person or group of people. So the feminine principle to me is about openness and awareness, and the masculine principle is about understanding that and directing it to achieve a specific result. So architecture by its very essence is a beautiful synthesis of masculine and feminine, because it requires that level of sensitivity and connection to the earth, the people, the specifics of the land, the materials used, and of course the impact of the shapes and the forms on the people for many, many years and decades ahead. And so the masculine aspect needs to navigate the various elements of the environment, from the budget to the municipality code requirements to the actual limits and possibilities of the materials themselves. So all of these together need to work in union. And that is traditionally has been the role of the architect, the ability to create an arc of energy between these polarities, the architect. And that's something that has continued to excite me and open me up. And it's really lovely that, Caroline, that you stood in for me there, because I'm a big fan of your work. And the last number of years I've been doing archetype work with men specifically. And so it was never far away from a core understanding of the programs, conscious and unconscious, that are stimulating our behavior. And so it's very nice that you were taking that role. Thank you again. So to wrap it together and answer the question, I would no longer delineate between masculine and feminine when seeking to procure beautiful space, because I think that's a recipe for schizophrenia. I would like to be able to reflect on the energy of a space, and then to be present within that reflection, and then to accept what is. And they're the three steps to repletion of a space, repletion of the possibility.
Wonderful. Good. Thank you for that answer, Michael. And I think that question will re-emerge when we're in Chartres.
I'm sure it will.
We're working with the cathedral and the various aspects that are affecting us when we're in that space. Jim, did you want to say something?
Yes, just since we're in a dialogic space, I'm very intrigued, Michael, at your assertion that where you're going as a spiritual entity, spiritual intelligence, and an architect and a teacher is beyond male and female. And I'm wondering, in light of the great notion of the Tao, the yin is the yin and the yang is the yang, and they contain each other, but they aren't each other. What do you really mean by what you just said?
Thank you.
I'm totally intrigued, and I hope you do a whole lecture on it with Chartres, and I hope Carolyn has a chance to respond. It's a rich,
so
rich, very rich. Thank you.
Well, to a large extent, I'm not preparing these answers, and that's the way it should be. So it makes sense that we do some focus on this in June, because it's very much rising within me and seeking expression. So let's keep this set for June, Jim. And we'll explore.
I hope you will be coming in July, because that's when our program is. But it actually, the faculty does arrive the last couple of days of June, but the program is actually in July.
No,
so
thank you for, I'm sure you're
on your calendar.
Yeah, I'm sure some of the listeners suddenly freaked out when I said June.
Right.
Okay. Yes, for sure.
Just wanted to make sure that you have that clear.
Yes, absolutely.
All right. So here's my next question for you. So I'm very intrigued. You know, and Carolyn was speaking about this, I think, before you might have gotten on, about the limitations of religious dogma and structure, and how the human being is evolving toward the future of the oneness, and that in relation to what you had as your first question, which was when you were going into architecture school, which was, well, I want them to teach me how and what the organization was of how God created the world.
Yes.
What are the principles on which God created the world? And so I'm sure that in one sense, that's a lifetime question. But in another sense, you've come to certain understandings and certain curiosities in relation to that question. You've made progress from when you started.
Mhm.
And I'm just wondering if there are any moments in your development as a seeker of this truth
Mhm.
that were great ahas or inspirations that have really led you on a path of creativity, ways in which you think you've connected on to the answer to that question, whether it's through, not that you necessarily understood it all cognitively, but you could feel energetically like you were on that track.
Yes. Okay. Wonderful. So, for sure, when I first meet clients, and I think this is where we can anchor the answer. When I first meet clients, I ask them a very simple question. I ask them, what is your bliss? What is your passion? And they begin to wonder, that's not a normal question. Architects would normally, make questioning the budget or the size of the building or the nature of the brief. But what is the passion? And something amazing happens in this answering. The actual specifics of the answer are never that important. They're just story driven. But when someone is asked what their passions are, there is a relaxation within them, and coupled with a natural excitement. And a combination of these movements and flows opens them to what it could be to be fully themselves, to be their fully actualized, fully repleted self. And this is beyond the ability to describe it in several sentences. It's a state that most of the clients inadvertently drop into. And when they do, they begin to radiate. And that radiation takes geometric form. And for whatever set of circumstances of my birth, I believe we all have this ability, but I have a sensitivity to perceive the patterns of their radiation, of their radiance. So when they're enthusiastically describing their passions, or even if they don't know what their passions are, but even being asked the question was enough to activate this response. The patterns that they are expressing cymatically, in terms of their bioenergy field, seem to be a personalized code for their optimal timeline, for their past, present, and future movement to remember who they are. And that's quite a spiritual moment. And I've experienced that directly and witnessed it directly. It must be hundreds of times. And it's a very special moment that I never get bored of. I never assume it's going to happen. I'm always delighted when it does, yet it always does. And the information that comes forms the genesis of the design. So can you imagine being asked a question, how would you like to build and live in a space that is the geometric dimensional structure of your highest calling, of your passion, of your bliss, of your soul's signature? Now that's a lofty thing to say, and it's scary to contemplate, because then we look around the spaces where we're in and saying, is this my soul? So how can we ensoul a space that isn't of this pattern? And that too is a beautiful question and a lovely movement. So this is not about everybody having the wherewithal to afford the possibility of a unique sacred geometry bio-home. It's about recognizing that this pattern is ever present in us. It's continuously reverberating and expressing and transmitting and transmuting the environment around us. And sometimes we get an opportunity to express that in the formulation of a new space, but most of the time we end up expressing it in our relationships. And in the relationship, not just with our current environment, but with the people in our lives. And this seeking of not clarity, that's not the right word, but resonance with this core signal has driven so many people to religion, because they imagine the religion will somehow give them the access. In the same way, I was fully prepared to give my power away to the architecture school. I wasn't aware I was doing that at the time, but that's exactly what was happening. I could easily have been, a few thousand years ago, stepping into a mystery school or a religious movement, and I would be asking the same questions. And I was just lucky that they didn't have the answer. Because as Mark Twain said, it's not what you don't know that gets you in trouble, it's what you know to be true that just isn't. and that's a classic, you know. So I would not assume to have the answers, but I very much enjoy seeking, and I very much enjoy witnessing and directly experiencing the potential of sacred space and beautiful rooms and movements being created by people who are open. And any of the work we're doing with geometric rituals and rites of passage, and any of these movements can, of course, be viewed within an architectural context or within a spiritual context, because ultimately it's the same thing.
Good. Thank you, Michael. So I have another question for you.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm resonating very strongly with the things that you're saying, and it's very easy to have questions for you. So I'm hoping not to be putting you on the spot, but here's my question. Let's say that I'm a client who comes and sits down in your office, and you put this question to me: what's your bliss?
Mm-hmm.
And I say, well, I would like my home or the building that you're going to build or design for me
Mm-hmm.
to reflect that love is the highest principle in the universe. And then what happens inside you? What creative forces create a design? How does that work?
Uh-huh. Well, you can see I'm smiling. I'm smiling because that would be my first reaction if you were to say that. It would be a warm smile of resonance, you know, because we have been collectively, and of course individually, we have been dumbed down to a pretty epic extent in terms of our appreciation and sensitivity to space. So because we are so unaware of the impact of space on us, it's never taught in school, it's never appreciated, and anyone who's into this is usually viewed as somebody who's not mainstream. So the impact is so dumbed in us that we wish to try and imprint a high principle into our space by the mention of it. So for me, love isn't the highest principle, it's the only principle. So I wouldn't even delineate it in terms of high or lower. That love is the natural movement of energy and information within, through, and around a space. So that is, by definition, to me and by my understanding, love in movement. How we can open to that and how we can feel love and acceptance within ourselves and allow that to affect the environment and let that form the space, that's very interesting to me. So if you came to me with this question, it would be the beginning of a very exciting dialogue. It would be the beginning of a very creative process, for sure. Because then we would get an opportunity for me to ask you a question back. What does love mean to you? And that opens up the energy. If you say love is a feeling, then that's something we can work with. If you say love is a high principle, what does that space look like? Because I know many people who are very present and very grounded and very accepting of everything and with full ability to massively change not just the energy of their own bodies, but the whole space around them. And they are living in toxic environments, either physiologically toxic or environmentally toxic or emotionally toxic. They're living in these environments and they radiate grounded peace and love. So where's the architecture playing there? So it's an inside story that we are increasingly becoming aware is an outside expression of that inside story. So that question is delightful. And you say, what if you were a client and you were to ask me that question? I have been asked that question quite a few times. And it does open up this future timeline, because, you know, many's a time I would say, I'm not necessarily designing a building. I'm remembering it from your best future. So if we collapse the notion of linear time and allow our consciousness to dance among the waves, we start to see and feel and sense a space that is a reflection of your inner sense of self. And ultimately, we could easily argue that everything is a story about self-love and self-acceptance. And the space is ultimately going to reflect that. If we expect the space to do the work for us, we're in trouble. Because for sure we could spend the money and time and energy to create a sacred space according to all of these principles, but we may not be able to handle it. Because whenever I do the initial sketch and give it to them, I actually issue a warning. No fear-based thinking, but a gentle warning of saying, listen, this is an initiation of a set of possibilities that you need to breathe into. You can't just say, oh, nice design, let's do it. Because it's an invitation for you to be better than you are. It's an invitation for you to upgrade your sense of self, to be in alignment with this higher principle, and not to expect the religion or the building to do it for you. These buildings will elevate you, or to use a euphemism, they will kick your ass. It depends on your ability to handle the information. So for sure, space affects us, and it can upgrade us and affect us positively. Or if we're not able to, or if we have set ourselves up beforehand to expect the building to do the work for us, then we're in trouble. So I believe that the sacred space should be a celebration of who we are, not a substitute for it. It should be an environment that reflects who we know we are, as opposed to an ointment or a remedy for who we think we're not. Does that make sense?
It does, but
Okay.
it doesn't answer my question.
So, okay, let me focus. Answer it one more time. Ask it again, please.
Okay, and I'll ask it probably in a different way.
Please.
But you know, if I were to ask you to create a design,
Yes.
that embodies the energetic field of love,
Yes.
that is flowing in the cosmos, that when one enters, one feels that they're in a sacred space that is holding a form that reflects the energy of the divine,
Okay.
which I believe is love. Okay,
Yes.
so my question is then, what happens after all the dialogue and you go away by yourself and you're sitting at the drawing table? What goes on inside of you in terms of geometry or, you know, sacred principles that starts working to create the design?
Okay, that's another way of asking a wonderful question. Thank you. So increasingly, and it was Jim, you mentioned this evolution in my in how I work and so on. Before, I would have had a rudimentary understanding that became quite developed in terms of the different shapes, the platonic solids, the triangles, the tetrahedron, the squares, and so on, and their properties, not just their geometric mathematical properties, but the effects on our consciousness of these shapes, from a feeling of safety or containment or limit, or the pentagon, which is about expansion and so on. And you've got the platonic solids, as all of your listeners, I'm sure, know well about, the platonic solids, which effectively take us on a journey from the genetic point of initiation of an idea or of a form, of a life form, whatever. And they take us through a series of steps which are about containment and incubation. And then when the life form is ready, be it a design or an organic life form, there is a point that containment is now ready to distribute itself into the environment, is ready to expand. So, back to your question, I want to be specific in the answer. Some of these shapes and forms contain signatures of information and energy that can be used consciously in a space. And the geometry of love, according to some people, would be epitomized by the golden spiral or the golden ratio, or by the pentagon, which is a expanding and contracting according to the golden ratio 1.618, which is the only known proportionality and mathematical geometric signature, again to use that word, that is able to add and multiply at all dimensions. So it's pure shareable fractality, as Dan Winter would say. So within this context, that can be viewed as the geometry of love. But here's where things get really interesting. If we were to assume that, and you were to, and I was to say, the golden spiral and the pentagon, they're perfect love geometries for the following intellectual reasons. And then I make that space for you based on that belief. It may or may not be true. They certainly would have an effect on you. But are you prepared for the implications of living in this space? Specifically, and by example, living in a pentagon initially is very, very beautiful experience. There's a feeling of non-linear expansion. There's a feeling of all these other dimensions coming into you. But then something begins to happen. It could be days, weeks, or months, but you begin, everything that's in your shadow, everything that's currently a shadow archetypal expression within your behavior, be it learned or assumed or inherited, it begins to come to the surface because there's nowhere to hide in this geometry. And what do you do then? If you're conscious and aware, you work with it, and the space is lubricating your spiritual development. If you're not prepared for this because you have a belief that this space is meant to be love, why am I thinking about my mother who never breastfed me? You know, why am I getting on? Why am I not getting on? Why? Then you'll think, what's wrong with the space? I want my money back. So the implications of living in these spaces are profound and not to be taken lightly.
Yes.
That's never meant to be viewed or expressed by any way or means of fear. I'm saying it only as a level of awareness that if we were to build a hexagonal space, that brings its own beautiful gifts and its own challenges. So to me, all the geometries are expression of love. And I know that sounds a cliche. I know it sounds like a wishy-washy generalization. But I wouldn't wish to say that this shape is sacred and this one isn't. I no longer wish to say that. I would have said that for 20 years. Here's sacred geometry, here's sacred form, this is good, that's not. And yet the experience has accumulated to the point that I can no longer ignore it, that it's entirely possible, albeit a little more difficult, but it's entirely possible to be vibrating with what we would now all agree is love in a toxic physical environment. I'll give you one example. I designed a cancer clinic about 12 or 15 years ago, and it was based on a piece of land that was donated by the health board, the Department of Health. And get this, this was a place for people to recover from cancer, as well as getting some relief and some alternative therapies while they were going through chemotherapy and radiotherapy. So the actual plot of land was triangular. And it was triangular because one of the sides of the triangle was a busy road, and the other two sides of this triangular plot was high tension overhead electrical cables. And so even though I pointed out to the oncologist that this was quite crazy for the following good reasons, he said, what can I do? This is the only land we have. So I designed the building based on the geometry of DNA, which when you view DNA from above, it's a decagon, it's a 10-sided shape. And this would be based on the molecular bond angles between the A, C, T, G amino acids in the molecule of DNA. So this was the shape of the building. And it looked relatively normal on the outside for a number of practical reasons, but inside it had this feeling and this flow. Now, I wasn't involved in the actual construction. My role was to design it only. So a builder and an engineer had the job of actually realizing and procuring the building. And they did so, but get this, they use a steel frame. So they put a steel frame, completely unnecessarily so, a steel structural frame with a metal encased grid in the concrete floors, and which was utterly picking up on the electromagnetic information from the overhead cables. By any reasonable understanding, this would be a place where you would get cancer, and you wouldn't have a hope of getting better from it in this environment. So at the time, I was in a little bit of stress over this because I felt somehow responsible for this, even though it wasn't my decision. But I said, okay, I'm going to wish for the best and just keep an eye on it. So for the last 12 years or so, I regularly call into the people who run the place. And you could not meet a happier bunch of people. They actually come in and work there for free on the weekends. They get paid Monday to Friday, but they come in because they prefer to be there than at home. And I said, look, what's the effect of this? And they said that this health board has a number of different cancer clinics. Usually they are not purpose built like this one. They were, reconditioned homes and other spaces. But the actual remission rate and the longevity and the healing that's happening in this building and around this building is factors of 10 above any other space. So I really had to think about this because my intellectual mind was saying, how can this be? This is a toxic environment by virtue of everything I knew to be true. But something was going on, and I believe it was a combination of the form and the people and the love of the people there. They created the environment. Sure, it's a beautiful building, and they move around it nice, and the light is coming in from all these different directions. So there is a feeling of spaciousness, there's a feeling of light and movement and life. And but nevertheless, I would have believed that the geometry of love wouldn't have been enough to make a difference. Not only did it make a difference, but overwhelmingly so. So I would seek to support the person to find a place within them where they are feeling full, where they are feeling fully themselves without anything extraneous operating on them. It's a difficult state. I mean, we're all being pushed and pulled continuously, but to support them to get to that point and then invite them to express something. It could take the form of an image, some sort of symbolism, some sort of resonance in their environment, even some words, and they become keys for unlocking the shape and form of the building they wish to create. Because ultimately, is that another cliche, it's some idiom, is two men look from prison bars, one sees mud and the other sees stars. So it really depends on our attitude and perspective. I suspect I haven't really answered your question for a second time. We will see. Maybe this will come up in short.
Well, actually, you did get really close. I mean, you touched on it. And
Okay.
in two ways. One was with the Pentagon and one was with the 10-sided figure for the Cancer
Yes.
Rehabilitation Center.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really brought forward a number of other questions that I look forward to talking to you about before we get to Chartres. And
Sure.
encourage you to go into when we are there.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
we'll be in touch about that. So in relation to our timing, Michael, it's been fascinating having this conversation, and I hope it's been interesting for you as well. And for all
These questions are great, Karen. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'd like to open up the call for other participants to have an opportunity to ask questions if they have them. We have about 10 more minutes before
Okay.
Apila gives us a closing benediction. Hi, Sheila.
Hi.
Hello, Sheila.
Hi, Michael. This is going to bridge what you had to say, Michael, with what Carolyn had to say. There's a quote that I'd like to read by a embryologist, Eric Blechschmidt. And this is the quote. The embryo conceptus is master of the whole geometry that it applies to itself. It is never mistaken about any angular sum and is never deceived in the surface to volume ratio. It never sets an intersecting point on the wrong site and is master of every physical as well as chemical reaction. I would like to suggest that maybe we literally do remember this perfect geometry that performed us and that we performed.
Yes. Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay.
Would it be possible for you to somehow link that, or maybe Dan, if you could find that link? I'd love to absorb that quotation, Sheila. Thank you for sharing it.
Okay. I don't know how to do that. I'll put it in the answer. I'll put the citation in the question and answer. Maybe somebody can pick it up from that.
Wonderful.
Oh, is that in the chat box? Is that where it is?
There's a Q&A box at the bottom, Karen, and there's also another question in there from Michael.
Okay, excellent. Okay, but when we hang up, does that all disappear?
I see a question there from Susan Terry. Hello, Susan.
Yeah, that's the question. Yes, if you want to just read the question.
Okay, so if nobody else can read that, it says, I spoke of the gifts that I had or acquired special gifts at a young age that enabled me to see the auras of others perhaps. Was there an event that took place to create this, or were you born with it? Okay, I'm very conscious of not creating either any false modesty or anything that would resemble specialness. We all have these abilities. I have 5 children. They were born at home and they were seeing auras continuously, you know, and so I would never for a moment say that's because they were my children. It's natural for all of us that the brain eventually gets tired or bored or unsure, and it starts editing all this information out. I cannot claim that I went through deep meditative processes that resulted in me suddenly having these special gifts. I was open, all my life, open to stuff, but I didn't have the language for it. I didn't have the conceptual awareness. But I have a specific memory when I was about 5 or so with my mother on a train, and I said to her, "Isn't it really cool the way you can look at people and you can tell everything about them?" And my mother said, "Don't be so stupid." Being a Catholic Irish mother, you know, such a thing would just be akin to witchcraft. So she wasn't gonna help me look at this one. But for sure, the martial art helped me to develop a sensory awareness that was almost. It was intuitive for sure, but it almost seems extrasensory. And again, I don't like using that because there is nothing extrasensory, it's all sensory. We just need to expand our editing protocol. And so a number of events for sure. In the middle of the 90s, when I started looking at feng shui and stuff, I started dowsing, and that allowed me to use external tools like the L rods and the pendula to start beginning to get a yes or no answer and expanding my awareness of space and being able to confirm what I was already feeling. And after a while, I no longer needed those tools. Like most people who continue to work with these, they realize that they are good learning tools. They are good sometimes to double check, but eventually it's our body that's doing the searching and the finding. And but a number of times most of my clients would be overseas, and quite often I wouldn't actually meet the client or see the land. And that would normally be viewed as an impossibility as an architect. The first thing that would be expected would be I would meet the people, I would see the land. That of course happens on occasion, but generally no. And yet I would do sketches. And those sketches would be freehand, and I would have elements in the sketches like a tree here or a mound of earth here or some stones, and then the building and the orientation. And then the client would say, "How do you know? Because that's our land. There are stones just there in that position where we want to put the house." This happened dozens and dozens of times. In some cases, the clients wanted a design but had yet to find the land. And I gave them a sketch, and a year later they would write to me and say, "You never guess, we found the land and it has the rocks exactly where you put them." So Is this psychic architecture, or is it just nonlinear awareness? I'm conscious of not assuming skills that beyond natural abilities that we all have. I have just been fortunate to find myself with a passion and a discipline that gives me opportunity to tune these. And so, Susan, to answer your question, yes, there is a plethora of singular moments and events where I suddenly became aware, wow, this is working, or how could I have known that? Or yes, that makes sense because exactly what I feel. And we've all had those accumulation of moments, that aha moments that link us. And even the aha moment, and we get the goosebumps on our arms, that's an electrical event. That's an implosive bio, but I'm not special. I just love what I do, and I've got skills to help people.
Thank you, Michael.
Okay. Did that come through okay?
Yes. Well, there was a little bit, at least on my computer, there was a little bit that broke up at the end. I don't know if that was on others, or if it was mine or yours or what, but.
I did see a little sign saying the internet connection was unstable for a moment, but it seems better now.
It's fine, yeah. And so we're really at the closing time of our call. But before Apila gives us a closing benediction, I just want to thank you so much for your conversation today and for your willingness to jump in and join our faculty and be part of this adventure that we are on in journeying through the 7 liberal arts in a modern context. And so I just really warmly welcome you and thank you, and very much look forward to all the times that we will have together in the future. So thank you. And I'd like to thank everybody else for being on the call today. And I guess it doesn't work that we all say goodbye at the end, but after Apila gives us a closing prayer, at least the faculty will get a chance to say goodbye to everybody. So Apila, would you be kind enough to speak some words on our behalf?
Am I unmuted now?
Yes.
Okay. Just lighting our smudge, our cedar from Chartres. Entering the dark, leaving the dark, we pass through a mist, the veil of Our Lady. In the light, in the pause, in the interstitial moment of that mist and veil, there is a light. Resistance gives form to movement and energy. Resistance, informed through the light glimmering in the mist, gives birth to resilience, to hope, to promise. Soul, mind embodied in Earth Mother. Now we proceed. Amen. Amen.
Thank you, Apila. Happy to be with you. And thank you, Jim, for all of your comments earlier today. And Caitlin,
Who's that with Michael? Michael all of a sudden became more beautiful. You must have discovered the geometry of love, Michael. That's the answer to your question, Karen.
There it is.
There it is. So let me introduce Susanna to you.
Hello, Susanna. We're delighted to meet you and hope you'll join us in Chartres this summer.
Yes.
Yeah, please come. Please come as our guest.
With pleasure.
Thank
Good.
you, everyone.
All right. Have a wonderful time until we meet again. Our next call is on February 15th. And during that time, Jane will be our featured speaker. So that should also be quite wonderful. So until then, much love to everyone.
Aloha.
Bye,
Thank you,
everyone.
Monterey.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Apila. Good to see you. Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.